Hi everyone and welcome to Inderes TV. Today here with Head of ESG Solutions, Karoliina Loikkanen at Inderes. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you have been digging into the Helsinki Stock Exchange 25 biggest companies and you have taken a look at their ESG reports.
Yeah, or specifically we have been looking at the management reports.
Yep.
So we have not actually been looking at the ESG reports, which are the broad reports in addition to annual reports. And why we took a look at the management reports is that we sort of consider that going forward all the ESG information needs to be signed by the board of directors. So we take that as a kind of a most formal information that the company gives out.
Yeah, and what were your findings?
Yes, that's a good question. So the first finding was that the Finnish large cap companies are really good at their ESG reporting in general. But we took a specific look at taxonomy and climate numbers. And at climate, we took a look at targets and reporting about targets. And also we took a look at the risks and opportunities, how the companies are assessing the risks and opportunities related to climate change and what they actually report about that. And on taxonomy, we of course were quite interested to see that what are the taxonomy eligibility numbers, because this was the first time the companies are reporting those. And
since the new legislation.
Yeah, since the new legislation, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course we wanted to understand how they are explaining the taxonomy figures, because it was already expected that the taxonomy figures in some sectors might be actually rather low, because the taxonomy legislation is not ready yet. And we just wanted to understand how they explaining it, how they are sort of giving out some additional figures related to green portfolios. And on climate, we were taking a look at how they set the targets, what sort of targets they've set, and what sort of information they give out.
Yeah. So if we start about the targets, what kind of targets did they set on the 25 biggest companies in the Helsinki Stock Exchange? They're quite different companies.
Yes, they are setting various targets, of course, and few of those have set already some carbon neutrality targets as well. But quite many of them have set so-called science-based target, which means that their target is aligned with this Paris climate agreement of getting only 1.5 Celsius global warming.
And this is a kind of numerical target?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a numerical target, and it means that they need to decrease their emissions by a certain percentage. And that information is rather well written already, and you can find it rather easily. But once it gets into the financial impacts of those targets, then we start to be a little bit more lost, because that information is not that well visible in the reports. And of course, if you take a look at the targets deeper, then there are targets which are covering the so-called own operations of the companies, like the premises. So if you have premises and you set the target of having 100% renewable energy, it's quite easy to understand that that means that you will purchase renewable energy, and depending on the operations, it either costs something or then it's rather nuts that what you need to cost. What you need to pay. But then when you go to so-called scope 3 targets, or you talk about the products and the usage time of the products, or then you talk about the supply chain and how much emissions the supply chain or producing the products is actually causing, then we talk about broad impacts. And
how is that measurable, or are there specific instruments of how to do this in practice, or how is it possible to know?
It's actually quite hard to measure. It's already a big project to measure those emissions, and we of course are quite cautious, because we understand that the data is not like 100% sure, but we need to use best estimates, right? To kind of be able to set the target, to set the direction, to go forward. But when we take a look at the actions that target setting will cause, then we of course have actions such as changing the product portfolio, or changing or asking the suppliers to reduce their emissions. And those are sort of changes which of course start to kind of impact the company as a whole. It starts to impact the investments, it starts to impact basically the supplier price.
And the whole operation.
The whole operations. Yeah. It may mean that you need to actually change your production in a way or another. And of course that might already have some financial impacts.
So that is kind of what you're lacking at the moment when
yes.
you look at the information.
Exactly.
The company has set the target, but there's a kind of gap between theory and practice of how to get there.
Yeah, I think partly it's dependent on the fact that not all the information is available. So we need to base a lot of the target setting on estimations, and that's fine. But of course, if there are some targets in place and if you have promised the targets to your shareholders, we start to kind of dig deeper and try to understand it. What does that promise actually mean from the kind of broader financial perspective, and does that mean that you need to actually change the strategy? So those kind of things. And of course then when you mentioned the taxonomy, we took a look at the taxonomy as well. So of course one question is also that how the company is able to explain whether there is a link between the climate target related to products, if that is existing, and the taxonomy figures.
Yeah.
So are they somehow aligned? And that's also a little bit missing still.
At the moment,
yeah.
But that's due to the fact that the taxonomy is a new thing for every company. But the ESG reporting has been, that's an old fact, but the taxonomy at itself, that's a new EU legislation at the moment.
That's a new EU legislation, and we are not that interested to see that what is the exact taxonomy figure today. We are not that interested to see that what is the amount of emissions the company is producing today, because due to the calculation methodologies, due to the legislation development states, that's not something that is kind of defining whether the company is good or bad, or whether it will need to decrease the emissions and how much it needs to decrease the emissions. But it's the way forward we are interested, and what is the journey they need to take, and what does that cost, and does that bring actually some opportunities to the sector or to the specific company?
That was my following question about the opportunities and risks. How should you as an investor look at this, and is data available? Because there could be opportunities as well.
Yeah, opportunity is a kind of a broad issue. Of course, investors have assessed those opportunities. That's part of the kind of basic job they're doing once they are investing in a company. But when we take a look at the climate risks and opportunities, there are of course a lot of kind of natural phenomena related risks as well, which have perhaps not been assessed so well before, and we don't even know what sort of a natural kind of phenomena there will be exactly. So it's really based on estimations. Yeah. When we talk about opportunities, we of course are quite interested in sectors which are impacted by green transition, like transportation, energy, sectors like those, and all the legislative initiatives which are to be put in place, like US Inflation Reduction Act, and these sort of legislative initiatives, and what are the impacts of those initiatives, and how are the companies able to benefit from kind of a pre-assessment of those initiatives, and how they are assessing the change in the market, how they are kind of taking that opportunity on the table, and how they are really implementing it. So those are of course topics we are also quite interested in.
So now a good starting point for future reporting on ESG terms, and those are the things to watch out for in the future.
Yeah, I would really recommend that. So climate targets, and what is the kind of journey forward? What does that mean in practice? And what is the schedule for certain targets and the impacts of the targets? And then I would also be rather cautious with taxonomy. I'm not saying that it's kind of a game changer entirely, but it might going forward have some impact, and of course we are quite interested to see that how that impact will look like.
Thank you so much, Karoliina Loikkanen, for all these comments.
Thank you.